Illinois Public Media News, this is 217 Today. I'm Kimberly Schofield. It's Tuesday, September 17th. Coming up, we'll learn about a law pending in Springfield that aims to ensure workers in hospital operating rooms are accredited. That story in just a few minutes, but first, these headlines. A federal trial in southern Illinois challenging a statewide ban on semi-automatic firearms is set to resume this morning with more witness testimonies. Mawa Iqbal has more.
Yesterday was the first day of the bench trial to decide whether outlawing guns like the AR-15 violates the Second Amendment. The plaintiffs called Marine veteran Jeff Eby, who testified that while semi-automatic guns aren't as accurate as handguns, they can fire more rounds and are therefore better suited for home self-defense.
I would like to see the people of Illinois have an opportunity to defend themselves as the Constitution directs, right? Not be pigeonholed down to a musket.
The law took effect nearly 2 years ago in response to the Highland Park Parade mass shooting. I'm Mawa Iqbal.
The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency says Archer Daniels Midland has violated federal regulations at its Decatur carbon sequestration site. At the Decatur City Council meeting yesterday, some councilors criticized the company for a lack of transparency and said the violations highlight the major issues with storing carbon underground. However, Councilman Chuck Hewell said to wait for an investigation before drawing conclusions.
Let's wait and see what happens, and I'm sure there's going to be investigations. Let's find out. Maybe ADM did something wrong. I don't know. Let's just wait and see instead of we're just throwing our biggest employer under the bus. I get tired of it.
Capital News Illinois reports an ADM spokesperson said a monitoring well leaked liquid carbon dioxide and another fluid into unauthorized areas. The spokesperson said they are working with the EPA to resolve the issue and that it does not affect the drinking water. Food inflation is going down. That's according to data out last week from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, but prices are still way higher than they were a few years ago. Harvest Public Media's Elizabeth Rembert reports that sticker shock is making its way into the presidential campaigns.
Candidates Donald Trump and Kamala Harris frequently bring up high grocery prices when pitching why they should be the next president. Pocketbook issues are extremely important and motivating for voters, according to Donna Hoffman, a political science professor at the University of Northern Iowa.
If their pocketbook is particularly being hit by high gas prices or high food prices, then those are certainly things that can work their way into the things that the presidential campaigns want to address.
Above all else, Hoffman says presidential candidates want to convince voters they care about the concerns of an average American. But once they're in office, Hoffman says presidents are limited in their ability to lower food prices. I'm Elizabeth Rembert, Harvest Public Media.
Crisis counselors on the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline have received around 10 million calls and texts from people in a mental health emergency. But some counselors say that they're also facing verbal and sexual abuse from a small fraction of callers. For Side Effects Public Media, Melissa Ellen reports counselors say they need protection.
Lily Lance worked at her local 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline call center in Bloomington, Illinois for over a year. She says she took several calls from people who were sexually and verbally abusive.
They would sometimes say things like, "Your voice sounds so good right now. You're making me feel so good right now."
Lance says these calls are the reason some staff quit the Lifeline. Abusive calls account for a fraction of the whole. Millions call in an emergency. And Lance says the abusive contacts never outshine the importance of the work 988 does. But
we're losing good people because of the emotional toll.
Crisis counselors across 988 centers want more protection from this behavior. For Side Effects Public Media, I'm Melissa Ellen.
Still to come, we'll learn about a law pending in Springfield that aims to ensure workers in hospital operating rooms are accredited. That story is coming up next on 217 Today, but first, meteorologist Andrew Pritchard with your forecast.
I'm meteorologist Andrew Pritchard with your IPM News forecast for Champaign-Urbana. Your forecast for today, sunny with a high of 86 degrees and a northeast wind 5 miles per hour. Tonight, clear skies with a low of 58 degrees, a northeast wind 5 miles per hour. Tomorrow, sunny with a high of 86 degrees, a northeast wind 5 miles per hour. Tomorrow night, clear skies with a low of 60 degrees, a northeast wind 5 miles per hour. And for Thursday, sunny with a high of 87 degrees and a southeast wind 5 miles per hour.
Next time on the 21st show, a growing number of Illinois students are missing a significant number of school days. In fact, 1 in 4 meets the legal definition of chronic absenteeism. I'm Brian Mackey. We'll talk about the problem and what's being done about it next time on the 21st show. Join us.
You're listening to 217 Today. I'm Kimberly Schofield. If you've ever been on an operating table, there's a good chance you took it for granted that the medical staff surrounding you were certified to do their jobs. While that's mostly the case, there's one job specific to surgery where that may not always be true. A bill in Springfield is seeking to change that. Lindsay Jones has more.
There's a lot of trust that goes into having surgery. Trust that the anesthesia will work. Trust that the nurses and doctors will take care of you, and of course, trust in the surgeon to get it all right. But there's another role that plays an important part in the operating room, and it's that of a surgical technologist. Here's surgical technologist Melissa Jensen.
We have to make sure that we have everything for the surgical case, so that's supplies, equipment, anything special for the surgeon's preference. And we do our surgical scrub, and we get in the OR, and we prepare everything for the surgery.
Now working in Northern Illinois, Jensen received an associate's degree from Parkland Community College in Champaign and then sat for a national exam that accredited her as a CST. And that path is generally how surgical technologists get into their profession. 60-plus credit hours of schooling, clinical work, and the national exam. But over the past few years, there's been a rise in online and on-the-job education training for future surgical technologists. And the Illinois State Assembly, the professional group that represents surgical technologists, is seeking to curb that through a bill that's pending in Springfield. Melissa Jensen is on the board of directors for that professional organization, but she says her own experiences working in hospitals have driven her to support the law that would require all surgical technologists be nationally accredited and trained before they work in an operating room with a patient. She says she worked in an operating room with someone who wasn't, and medical staff were doing an abdominoplasty or a tummy tuck.
We were literally cutting open their skin on their abdomen, and we have to lift it and undermine tissue, and it's a lot of suturing to close this procedure.
Surgical technologists not only prepare the operating room, but they also account for everything used in a surgery, from making sure everything is sterile and clean, to making sure it's accounted for once the surgery is over.
The day I was doing this procedure, I had an individual that was working in the OR with me. Of course, I didn't agree with it, but, I just went along with it, and it was time to count. So we do closing counts to make sure that no sponges or items get retained in a patient. And I went to go do my closing count, and I was missing a sponge.
The immediate fear was that the sponge had been left in the patient's body. Jensen says it took multiple staff members helping to search the room before the sponge was finally found in the trash.
We don't throw these sponges away until they are counted and we know we have every single sponge that we started with. If I wouldn't have found that sponge when I did, the surgeon and the first assist would have had to cut out all those sutures and lift this patient's stomach back up to make sure the sponge didn't get left under there.
Jensen says it wasn't the first time she'd seen an operating room staffed with someone who wasn't yet accredited or fully trained in surgical tech, but her hope is the proposed legislation will reduce the likelihood of this kind of thing happening. The healthcare profession, like many, is facing staff shortages, and there are no easy fixes to that problem. And in fact, the Illinois Health and Hospital Association said in a statement it considers the proposed legislation, quote, a solution to a problem that doesn't exist, end quote, and it also says it would, quote, exacerbate the healthcare worker shortage that plagues Illinois hospitals. But advocates for the bill argue it's necessary because while many hospitals might not offer on-the-job training to be a surgical tech, there are a few in the state that do. Springfield fixture Margaret Vaughn is lobbying for the surgical techs group on behalf of the bill.
There's only about 5 hospitals that we know in the state that are doing the on-job training, and we do know one of the ones that there's really only like 2 or 3 people through the years that have gone through the program that are still there.
But she says even 5 hospitals across the state is too many, given the stakes.
If the patient was aware of it, they would be outraged, the public. And we tell the public about it, they're outraged. But it's kind of like a dirty little secret you can keep because the patient doesn't know any better, and everyone has a mask on, and they assume that they would only assume that everyone's qualified around that table.
Vaughn also added that online training coupled with on-the-job training for surgical technologists might not best prepare them for the work, and in gathering petition support for the bill, proponents heard stories of people being overwhelmed and eventually leaving the job altogether. The Illinois Health and Hospital Association noted the bill lacked any, quote, peer-reviewed evidence, and, quote, to suggest that outcomes for patients would improve if the bill was passed. The legislation would not go into effect until 2026. Its authors say no one would lose their jobs if they were employed and didn't meet its standards. Instead, they would be grandfathered in, since the goal is to bolster healthcare staff going forward. Advocating for the bill on behalf of the surgical tech group, Margaret Vaughn says in her mind, the opinion of the surgeons in Illinois operating rooms is ultimately what matters, and more than 100 signed petitions supporting it.
At the end of the day, their liability is on the line. They're the ones that know the difference in the operating room, and when they're bringing the people in that were on the job training, they're calling and complaining, how did I get this person? So I think their opinion should definitely matter.
The bill was introduced in the Illinois Senate in January. It's still waiting for a vote. The bill was introduced into the Illinois Senate in January. It's still waiting for a vote. I'm Lindsay Jones.
That's it for today. 2 and 7 Today is produced by Stephanie Mosqueda. Reporting today contributed by Mawa Iqbal, Anulika Ochuba, Elizabeth Rempert, Melissa Ellen, and Lindsay Jones. Music by the Kilbourne Alley Blues Band. Reginald Hardwick is our news director. I'm Kimberly Schofield. 2 and 7 Today is a production of Illinois Public Media. Thanks for listening, stay safe, and we'll talk to you again tomorrow.